Tell you what, guys, I have had so much fun doing some research for this video. Like, if it was anything else, I would have called it hard work. But ever since I chose to do this on the Saturday, I think I decided to introduce this. It's been like reliving like nostalgia, basically. That's the only word I can call it. It was initially supposed to be part of like the bigger podcast, but I thought no, it was going to be too long, so I thought, why not make it its own series? So that's exactly what I've done. Welcome to CTR Radio. My name is, you don't need to know my name. If you know my name, you know my name. But CTR Radio, Chart Topper Radio, welcome to a brand new series. We are doing a series called The Intro. Basically, the name is exactly what it means. I'm going to introduce you to an album. It's going to be an album throughout history. It could be a latest album. It could be one that's coming out soon. It could be like in the future. But no. Today, it is going to be an album that I don't think I'm overstating it when I say it could possibly be one of the, if not the most important rap album that's ever came out. And that's saying a lot. Basically, it's one of those albums where you look at it and you think the amount of people that contributed to this album, the amount of people that chose to get involved both on the songs and outside, like producing it, just the list of names are like a name of names in the history of hip-hop. Of course, we are talking about, if you've seen the Facebook post, if you've seen what I put on the story, we are talking about Doggystyle, Snoop Dogg, November 23rd, 1993. This was a long time ago, over 20 years ago now, but still as popular, I would say now, as it was back then. Mainly because of just the quality on this album. The absolute quality that is on this album is unreal. Even surprised me. I've listened to this album. It's got to be nearly 100 times. Listening to it, even doing this research, I listened to it 4 times since Saturday. It was a pleasure to get myself reacquainted with it. It was a pleasure to just look at the track list and think the amount of quotable verses on this album is incredible. The amount of quotable beats that you can hum along to, that you can do, and as soon as you do it, people know exactly what you're doing. The amount of songs that I noticed for a gangster rap album, the amount of the beats and like lyrics that were used on adverts all the way back in the 90s and all the way up till now is incredible. It was mostly thanks to Snoop Dogg. He was absolutely on fire in 1993. Considering this is his debut album, you might say that's a strange thing to say, but let me educate you a little bit. November 23rd, 1993 was a very, very important day for Snoop Dogg because he had to live up to a lot of hype. Mainly because of the work he did a year earlier on Dr. Dre's album, The Chronic, that was released in 1992. Now, Dr. Dre does make an appearance on this album, but he isn't rapping, he's producing it. He's the producer of this album, and his fingerprints are all over it. You can see Dr. Dre literally put his heart and soul into this album. Just as much as Snoop Dogg, I'd say. Just as much as Snoop Dogg. Suge Knight is the executive producer. He obviously was the owner of Death Row Records, along with Dr. Dre back in 1993, and then up until, I would say, 1999, and then it all started to crumble, but that's a story for a different day. So what was this album to hip-hop in 1993? Let me just describe the scene for you. Dr. Dre and Suge Knight on top of the world with Death Row Records, just starting what would be possibly one of the most successful record labels in rap history. I would say, my personal opinion, is the most successful record label in rap history, without a shadow of a doubt. The amount of people that you see on this record label at this time is incredible. You've got obviously Snoop Dogg himself, you've got Dr. Dre, both producing albums and producing most of the albums coming out at this time. You've got the Dog Pound, comprised of Daz Dillinger and Corrupt. You've got Lady of Rage, incredible artist in her own right. She does appear on this album along with the Dog Pound. You have got MC Hammer, I believe, was also part of Death Row Records at this time, which is even for me looking back at that is a strange thing to see, because you see people like Snoop Dogg, Dre, the Dog Pound, Tupac later on, and then you see names like MC Hammer next to those names. It trips me out a little bit. I'm not gonna lie, it trips me out to see. The features on this album, I will read them out to you. I've got a couple of notes here just to get into my brain, literally just because it's so much to take in this album. You've got the DOC, who does appear on one of the songs. It was one of those strange times for DOC, where obviously once Ice Cube left NWA in the late 80s and early 90s, DOC started writing a lot of their songs. Obviously you had Dr. Dre producing them, you had the DOC, who then transferred into Death Row Records, also writing some songs. Not in this case, I believe Snoop Dogg did write most of these songs along with Dr. Dre. You get a bit of a vibe on this album that it's mostly freestyle of Snoop Dogg. Especially, I'm going to mention the first song I'm going to mention now. It's not the first song on the album, but it's one of the most iconic songs to come off this album, the Shiznit. What can you say about the Shiznit? One of the most iconic songs to come off the album, as I said. Probably one of Snoop Dogg's most iconic songs, period. If you listen to this song, the intro itself is iconic, where he's on about W balls and all that sort of stuff. That is a trend throughout the whole album, and also a trend throughout this song. Like it's literally the intro for like the first 20 seconds. The beat behind the song, classic Dr. Dre. You've got the 808 the 808 drums in the background. You've got the classic West Coast 90s style that he pretty much introduced, I'd say. One of the people to pioneer that sort of beat in the background, and that is also a trend that is on this album. It sounds, in a way, similar, but as I say, not in a bad way whatsoever. It's you can tell Dr. Dre wrote most of these, if not all of these beats, if you know what I'm saying. You've got the recorder in the Shiznit, that fantastic. That is what I was talking about before. Like if you say that beat to anyone who loves hip hop and who knows 90s rap, if you do that little hum to them, they know exactly what you're talking about. A lot of stories to come off this album, especially off Snoop Dogg himself. The man himself was he was very nervous, and that sounds weird coming from a guy like Snoop Dogg, a guy who is so confident and so in the spotlight now, in just everywhere. You see him everywhere, mixing with all different types of celebrities, not just musicians, but he's in films, he does interviews, he even had his own TV show where he was cooking food. He's everywhere. But 1993, very nervous. And the reason why, just going back to what I was saying before, he was nervous because he had a lot of pressure on his shoulders. Everyone thought he was very impressive when he was on The Chronic. The Chronic was a very success. That in itself went triple platinum. That is probably an album that I'm probably going to be discussing in another episode. But Snoop Dogg contributed heavily to that album, really heavily. Just as much as Dr. Dre in terms of being on the songs. Nearly every song Snoop Dogg was on that album. And he felt the pressure. He felt like he wasn't going to live up to what people were thinking about him. Fair enough. Do you know what I mean? Fair enough. It's a lot of pressure to come off, especially if you've got a mentor like the DOC, who apparently Snoop Dogg was more interested in impressing than Dr. Dre, which is an interesting little fact that I learned while I was doing research for this album. Dr. Dre himself obviously cast a big shadow of everyone who he introduces into the hip-hop world, and I don't need to state how many people Dr. Dre has influenced and introduced to the hip-hop world, but Snoop Dogg was one of the first. And he felt the pressure. Fortunately, it all worked out. As you can probably tell, it worked out with this album. I'm going to ring off a couple of facts about this album for you. As of the week it was released, in the first week that this album was released, it sold 806,000 copies. Now that is impressive. In the next year, it sold 4 million. Obviously certifying it platinum, because, little fact for you, for an album to go platinum, it has to sell a million records. I believe it's in a certain amount of time. It might even be in a year's amount of time. This album went quadruple platinum. It is certified, put a stamp on it, certified quadruple platinum. Very impressive for a debut album. All in all, as of 2015, it has sold 8 million copies in the US and 11 million worldwide. Very impressive. As I say, this album is over 20 years old, and it still casts a heavy shadow. And that's the second time I've said this, because not only, as I say, did Dr. Dre cast a heavy shadow, but then Snoop Dogg, with his impressive debut album, set the bar. He set the bar for the rest of Death Row Records. He was like, here's my work. I'm new to this game, but I'm going to show you I've got chops. I'm going to show you that I've got lasting capabilities in this industry. Try and beat what I've just done. And a lot of people say Doggystyle, along with The Chronic, are the two best albums on that record label. And it's hard to deny it, because look at the success that it brought. Look at the artist that it brought us. It brought us Snoop Dogg. Snoop Doggy Dogg. D-O-G-G. What would the hip-hop world look like without Snoop Dogg? And that's what I wanted to, before we get into the songs on the album, that's what I kind of want to put across. This is, as I say, in my mind, probably in the top 3 most important albums of all time. We will get into the other 3, what I think are the 2 other most important albums of all time in a later episode. In the later episode of the intro. And that was a very long intro to this album, but I think it deserves it. I think it deserves it. You all think it deserves it. That's why you're here. That's why you're looking at the thumbnail thinking, Doggystyle, I gotta go listen to that album. But don't go listen to it yet, because I'm here to talk to you. Once again, welcome to CTR Radio. Don't call it a comeback, because I was always here talking to you. Now, I read off the facts for you. I read off a couple of facts for you. Let's talk about some of the most popular songs that are off this album. And it's hard to choose the first one to talk about, but let's talk about Gin and Juice, the second one on the album. Gin and Juice. Everybody knows Gin and Juice. Everybody knows the chorus. Rolling down the street, smoking Nando, sipping on gin and juice. Yeah, you don't have to make me sing it to you. You're making me singing it to you. I'm sorry. I'm lying, obviously. But Gin and Juice. Gin and Juice. It's hard to put into words the success that this song had when it first came out. Obviously, people still sing it to this day. People recognise the beat as soon as it comes in, along with the intro, which is sort of it's very prominent throughout the whole album. The whole album consists of intros where it's like on a radio station. That's the whole theme of this album. It's actually got a double intro where it introduces it as a radio station, and then in the actual second song, it's like about 2 minutes long. It's a bit of a freestyle, once again saying on W Balls, which is the radio station what they're saying is on in this album. It's one of those songs where you can instantly put your phone on shuffle. You're going through songs. You're like, no. I don't think I've ever skipped this song on a shuffle. When it's come up on my phone, right there, right then and there. Snoop Dogg is on this song mostly by himself. Obviously, you've got a lot of collaborations on the album, which we'll get to that in a moment. In fact, we'll get to that right now. Why not? Let's talk about some of the collaborations that's on another song that is massively popular off this album, Serial Killers. Now you've got Daz Dillinger off this absolutely amazing young group that was coming up by themselves. This album actually took them to success, kind of as how The Chronic took Snoop Dogg to success. The Dog Pound introduced an album called Dog Food a couple of years later. But they first mainly appeared on The Chronic, and they appeared more on Doggystyle. Daz Dillinger, for me, and Corrupt, especially Corrupt, two of the most underrated 90s rappers, I would say. They've got to be at the top of that list. They never really transitioned into major success after Death Row sort of collapsing on itself. They were, obviously people know them throughout the rap industry as, pioneers, because they introduced with Snoop Dogg this sort of gangster rap G-Funk beat, which is once again very prominent on this album. That's pretty much what it consists of. It consists of G-Funk, which was coming up. It's a subgenre of rap, Snoop Dogg used a lot of this throughout his career, especially in the 90s, going through to the late 90s and even the early 2000s. It was, if you thought of G-Funk, you thought of two names. You thought of Nate Dogg and you thought of Snoop Dogg. Nate Dogg also appears on this album. Just a little spoiler there for you. We're going to be talking about him in a bit. But the Dogg Pound, actually, I believe, from what I was noticing on this album, I believe they had the most collaborations and the most appearances on this album, which is fair enough, because at the time they were actually rolling with Snoop Dogg. They were in his crew. A bit like how, to compare it to Junior Mafia, the way they always hang around Biggie Smalls, the way, are they Bone Thugs? I think it's Bone Thugs. Always hung around Tupac. Always around him, always in the songs, obviously hanging around with Dr. Dre and DOC. Absolutely amazing group of people right there who have just mentioned. It's been about 10 seconds and I've just mentioned possibly the 4 or 5 of the most important people in hip-hop in the 90s, which is incredible just to say, seeing as though this is Death Row's only second album to come out, I believe. Second major album, anyway. You've got Warren G on this album with Nate Dogg. Them two collaborating together is always going to be a hit, and obviously they do collaborate with Snoop Dogg on this album. But with the Dogg Pound, with Serial Killers, Daz Dillinger puts in a really good effort. Corrupt sounds a little bit. I didn't notice how deep Corrupt's voice got later on in the 90s. He must have switched his style up, because his voice in this album was very, I won't say high tone, but towards the late 90s. And the early 2000s, Corrupt started sounding a little bit like Jadakiss with his delivery of rhymes, which is it's strange to hear him as like a bit of a young. Obviously, they were a lot younger, Daz and Corrupt. I mean, Snoop Dogg was no old man, but he was a little bit older than them two guys. Moving on, and this song has actually got a story behind it. Probably one of the most infinite stories of Snoop Dogg. This will last forever, this story, I think. Mainly because the poetry of it, in terms of the order which it took place. We're talking, of course, about Murder is the Case. Murder is the Case is a weird one, because Snoop Dogg, after this song was written, which a lot of people don't know, a lot of people think Snoop Dogg wrote the song about the situation, but as we'll get into in a minute, it's actually the other way around. Murder Was the Case was written, and then Snoop Dogg actually was brought up on murder charges along with his personal bodyguard. And this case lasted for a long time, 3 years. 3 years, from 1993 to 1996. He was finally acquitted of murder. Basically what happened was, he was obviously heavily involved in gang activity, as was most of the highly prominent rappers in the 90s. He was involved with the Crips. He got involved with this other Crip. Basically, the Crips are an American gang. They've got sets. If you're part of a different set than the Crips, then you might have beef. I am not going to get into them details, because, I'm a white kid from England. I don't know much about that. But anyway, he got into beef with this guy. Apparently, Snoop and his bodyguard was driving past in this Jeep. They started shouting at this guy. Obviously, he started shouting abuse back. He went for, allegedly, it was proven in court, but allegedly, he reached for his gun, and Snoop's bodyguard fired, because he saw this was going to happen. He fired to stop this from happening. He killed him. Snoop then went on the run for a week, which is where the story gets absolutely incredible. So basically, Snoop was on the run from the police for a week. Suge Knight at the time, the owner of Death Row, made a deal with the Los Angeles Police Department. He was like, let him appear at the VMAs. He was doing some interviews at the VMAs. so that's why he wanted him there. Let him introduce this award to the winner. The award slips my mind. He was like, let him introduce this award, and then he'll turn himself in after the show. When will you ever see that? When will you ever see the head of a record label taking advantage of murder charges, and the police then actually turning around and going, yeah, all right, yeah, that's fair, why not? We'll let that happen. That seems okay to us. Do you know what, Suge Knight? You're a good guy, and Snoop's probably a good guy as well, so we'll let him do it. So that all went down. He got arrested. He went to court, obviously. This went on for a long time. The prosecutors obviously was accusing him and his bodyguard of killing this guy in cold blood. The defense was saying it was self-defense because the guy was reaching for his weapon. As you probably know, the way it turned out was in Snoop Dogg's favour and his bodyguard. His bodyguard actually got let off of all charges as well. He made a video the next year, 1994, which is where I think the story gets confused, and a lot of people get confused with, the song came out first, the murder charges came after, the murder charges came first, and the song came out after. So the song came first, and then he went to court, went on trial, and while he was on bail, which was $2 million, by the way, it got posted by Death Row. Suge Knight really wanted him out of jail because they wanted to capitalise on its success. I mean, at this point, don't forget, Doggystyle had sold nearly 1 million records and, was carrying on into success into the next year. They wanted him out of jail. They wanted him making money. They wanted him making more songs. They wanted him in the public eye. The next year, he made a short film that Dr. Dre produced, I believe. So not only is he a music producer, he's a film producer. Well done, Dr. Dre. That's 3 hats you've got now. Rapper, music, and film producer. So he made this video, and a lot of people say that this really helped him in his trial. A lot, actually. Because he made this film called Murder Was the Case. It was accompanied by his song that was in the background, and it basically portrayed the story of Snoop Dogg gets shot, he makes a deal with the devil, comes back, uses that extra life to kill the guy that killed him, and then he goes to jail. Now, although he goes to jail at the end of this film and then gets stabbed up because he killed a guard or something, it's a crazy video. So, go and watch it. Go and watch it after this. Don't watch it now. Watch it after this. That's a good order, I think. It was weird because, as I say, although he goes to jail at the end of the film, he was sort of portrayed as the victim. And I'm not saying it wasn't self-defense, but this film swayed the public and actually swayed the jury into mostly believing and being on Snoop Dogg's side. Not only that, the prosecution was accused of losing a lot of evidence. They lost the shell casings, and they lost I believe they lost the shirt that his bodyguard was wearing. Another thing that obviously went in Snoop Dogg's favour was the whole story was that the guy was pulling a gun, and that's why his bodyguard shot him. His mates, not Snoop Dogg's mates, this guy who was pulling the gun, hid the gun, which they eventually found, which made the guy look guilty. Going back to the shell casings and the clothes and everything, the prosecution was, especially the police, they were accused of destroying the evidence, and then they were like, "No, we didn't destroy it, we hid it." I mean, no, we didn't. What? No, that we didn't say that. That's basically what happened. So everything was going in Snoop Dogg's favour. I can't tell you how much the prosecution messed up. I mean, and if they didn't, what we could be looking at now is a world where his fame and his success stopped at Doggystyle. And obviously he went on to make a lot more, amazing albums and amazing singles with amazing celebrities, but that is just a little story. That is just a little story about Murder Was a Case and Doggystyle. Another fact about Doggystyle, I'm just throwing in facts left, right, and centre. I'm keeping you on your toes. It debuted at number 1 at the Billboard Top 200, which is impressive. It's impressive for a guy that didn't have an album before this and only featured on Dr. Dre's album the year before. It's insane. Like, not a lot of people even today have that success with, albums that were behind them. The fame that they already had. Like, not a lot of people that can debut at number 1. It's really impressive, especially in the 90s. It was competition. A lot of competition, because you had a lot of people out there. 1993. Let's look at 1993 again. You've got, I forgot to mention how big Tupac was coming up in this era. You had Biggie Smalls making a name for himself in New York. Nas in New York. Nas has had a very successful start to his 90s. Obviously, we had Illmatic. Everyone loved Nas. A lot of competition, and that's why he was nervous. And that's why he felt he had a lot of pressure on him. He didn't know what to do. All he knew was take advice from Dre, take advice from DOC. It was a weird time in his career, and then this is what an interview said that he was in. He said he felt like sorry, there's a bit of stutter there. He felt like a quarterback in a football team. He had all the skills, all the potential. He knew he could perform, but he didn't know if he could score. Now, to all the English listeners, he felt like a striker, a professional, world-class striker who didn't know how to score. He had all the talent, he had all the potential there, but he wasn't sure he could come through on it. Which is it's interesting looking into the mind what he was thinking there. What he was actually thinking was crazy, really, because, as I say, hindsight's a beautiful thing. I'm pretty sure he wouldn't be thinking that now after he looks back at over 20-year career, thinking, I nailed it. I absolutely killed it. 13 songs on this debut album, by the way. Pretty impressive for a debut album, especially in the short time that he wrote the album. I believe the album was wrote from July till October, and then it came out in November. So, not a lot of time to write, considering the amount of songs that are on here that are iconic now. You think, wow, he wrote all of them amazing songs there. Do you understand what I'm saying? It's crazy. It's crazy. It's crazy to think that the amount of backing that he had, the record label, obviously, with the murder case and everything, with the money that they put forward to get him on bail, to get him out there, to get him, back in the public eye. I mean, just to put into perspective how popular Snoop Dogg was. Jimmy Iovine is possibly one of the most famous music producers in that industry, marketing guys of all time. He's worked with John Lennon, he's worked with Marilyn Manson, he was Interscope's guy, basically. Interscope Records was the father record label of Death Row at the time, and I believe still is, just because of of the licensing that they own. Jimmy Iovine, and they actually had an argument over this, him and Snoop Dogg. Turned around to him and said, I want you on the Rolling Stone cover. And now, just to put that into perspective for you, in the early 90s, people of Snoop Dogg's background didn't appear on Rolling Stone. I mean, just to quote Snoop Dogg, that was the white guy magazine. He wanted to appear on The Source, which obviously is one of the most famous hip-hop. It's the shit, basically, in terms of hip-hop magazines at this point in time. He was arguing with Jimmy Iovine. He was like, no, I don't want to go on the Rolling Stone cover. That's not me. That's not what I do. But Jimmy Iovine was very insistent on it. He was like, we're going to introduce you to the white America, basically. I believe that's the words he actually used, the white America. So Snoop was like, right, okay. Looking back at it now, it was a huge success because a lot of people was introduced to rap through that and through this album. Once again, just to quote Snoop Dogg again, Snoop Dogg and Dr. Dre made rap okay to listen to for white people and people who weren't in the ghetto, people weren't from that background. NWA scared them. Snoop Dogg and Dr. Dre made them feel good, made them feel happy. which once again is weird. Is weird to think about, because obviously it's gangster rap. It's still gangster rap. It's the early 90s, probably the golden age of rap. But people were more okay with listening to this type of music. I'm rambling. I'm rambling. But I just think it's a fascinating thing. Another thing I want to talk about this is the album cover also is an iconic part of this album. The whole look of it is, and you can probably see in the thumbnail if you listen to me, if you're still listening to me, thank you. it's iconic, and if you see it on a shelf, you're like, Doggystyle, there it is. I've seen it. It's great. It's a controversial, I suppose. It's a very controversial album cover, but it was actually designed by Dr. Dre, and it was made. The artwork was then actually done by Snoop Dogg's cousin. So a lot of it was in-house. A lot of it was done by the people that were in and around the scene and connected to Snoop Dogg, which is what I'm saying. Like, he had a lot of backing. It's impressive to see how much they got behind this guy. Like, it's insane. Another song what I want to talk about is, obviously we've talked about Gin and Juice, we've talked about serial killers, we've talked about Murder Was the Case. Like, Who Am I, What's My Name? Probably, in my opinion, the most iconic beat to come out of this album. You can still be heard everywhere. It was very recently, in the past couple of years, used on a Money Supermarket advert, I believe. It's been used a lot throughout history. Absolutely fantastic. I do believe, actually, a lot of these songs, including Who Am I, What's My Name, went platinum themselves. Like, a single can go platinum. I believe it has to sell 2 million individual copies. But Who Am I, What's My Name? Yeah, absolutely fantastic album. I'm just looking at the notes that I made now. Yeah, another thing that was really interesting that I saw him talk about was Doggystyle, the actual name of the album, isn't actually what you think it is. Now, a lot of people think Doggystyle, he did that for controversy, and he did. He did choose it for controversy, but he also said it wasn't actually supposed to be the meaning of the album. Obviously, you have the sexual undertones of that name, but Doggystyle, literally how it says, that was him. That's how he rolled. That's who he was. It was Snoop Doggy Dogg. That was his style. Doggystyle. I thought that was interesting. Just a little fact that I just looked up there. I'm not gonna go on. I'm not gonna go on for all day about this album. Just reviewing it is a privilege for me, especially just because I think this is the perfect album just to start on. I do want to say before we finish that if you take a look at how Snoop Dogg has grown as a person and how he's sort of changed from who he is now to who he was back then. Back then he was a gangster rapper. He was heavily involved in gang activity. He was in the life, basically. And now, because of the experiences that he's had and the experiences that he went through in the 90s, with his murder trial, you had people around him that were getting killed. I mean, you'll notice in this album, there's quite a lot of digs to Eazy-E. Rest in peace. It was a massive rivalry that was in the 90s. Like, it got bloody, it got horrible, and it all started obviously at the breakup of NWA. But because Dr. Dre went to Death Row Records, it was treated as Death Row Records was run as a gang, basically. Mainly because of Suge Knight. Suge Knight brought a lot of gang members in as producers, directors, bodyguards, security. It was run like a gang. And I won't say in the future episode of the intro, I do want to talk about Death Row Records and the mentality that it made most of its people being while they're in there. But I do want to say, in terms of hip hop, I do think Snoop Dogg is a massive, massive influence. and what should be going forward for rap. And I think what all rappers should aspire to be. A guy who was in the game, like a lot of people are now. A guy who realised if he kept going down that road of, I'm going to, just a violent road, and didn't change his mind, it could have ended a lot worse for him. I mean, you see guys like Biggie, Tupac, guys who died way before the time, guys who died in the 90s because they were part of that life and they never changed it. They rapped about violence, so violence sought them out. Snoop Dogg was very smart. He realised that all of his friends were disappearing around him, and he wanted to get out of that game. And I think that if he hadn't have thought that, if he hadn't have come to that conclusion, then I think we'd be talking about Snoop Dogg as we talk about Tupac, as we talk about Biggie, as we talk about Eazy-E. I mean, he didn't really die in a violent way. He died in a different way, but you got to think he was heavily involved in that type of that type of lifestyle. I don't think Eazy would have lived much longer if he didn't die of the way he did die. It sounds horrible because he's actually my favorite rapper of all time. But it's strange. It's strange to see. It's strange to see how one decision in your life can make a difference. I want to end on by saying Snoop Dogg looks back at this album as the heart and soul of his career. He looks back on it as he would be nowhere without the people that was with him. He'd be nowhere without the people that helped him get to where he is now. But it all started at Doggystyle. And he tries and lives his life now how that album made him feel, heart and soul. And I suppose that's love. Which is so strange to hear someone like Snoop Dogg talk about that sort of stuff, because you don't think of him like that. You don't think of him as a guy who has that mentality, but he does. He really does. And everyone who talks to him, everyone who has worked with him, you talk about your Justin Timberlakes, you talk about your Timberlands, you talk about your Pharrells, you talk about your Tupacs, you talk about your Dr. Dre's, you talk about your Eminems, you talk about your 50 Cents. The list goes on and on. Katy Perry. But every one of those people has one thing to say about Snoop Dogg. And there's a reason, I'll put it this way, why he's known in the rap industry as Uncle Snoop. And why he calls everyone nephew. Because all he wants to do is help people get to that place in hip hop where he's at in his career. But anyway, guys, I digress. Thank you for listening to me for this amount of time. It has been an absolute pleasure talking to you for this amount of time. I will be uploading probably on Sunday or Saturday. It would probably be sometime on the weekend. You might be thinking, why is he going so quiet? It's because I'm looking at my upload schedule. I know it's only been a couple, this is going to be the second video, but I've got an upload schedule, and I want to do this intro every month, and I want to do it probably every week. Every Tuesday. I'm going to aim for every Tuesday. The main podcast I want to do every Saturday. This is probably going to be longer than the podcast, mainly because we're diving into a specific conversation about a specific type of genre, about a specific album. Very, very specific. So specific that I've said specific so many times that it's starting to sound like a weird word. But you get my point. Guys, if you was to take away anything from this video, it would be go and listen to Doggystyle. It's one of the most iconic rap albums of all time. It's one of the most iconic albums of all time. Everything that I've said about it cannot do it justice. As I've said, I've listened to it 4 times since the video and research on this. But I want to go and listen to it again. It's just the type of album that it is. It's got a bit of a radio vibe to it, as I said. All the intros are radio inspired. And it just makes the album flow and it sounds amazing. That's the one thing I would take away from this album. Thank you very much for listening to me once again. I think I've said thank you very much about 4 times, but thank you again. That makes it 5. Please like and subscribe. Share this video, please, if you enjoyed it. I tried very hard to research this as best as possible. I hope I did the album a good service. I tried my very best. Follow us on Instagram at Charttopper Radio, all one word. We do have a Facebook group as well, Charttopper Radio. Please, I mean, if you join the Facebook one, thank you very much. Please join the Instagram one as well. Join both. Please join both. Join all 3 and subscribe to this channel. Thank you very much, guys. I'm gonna stop talking because I'm rambling now, but I've had so much fun making this video. I'll chat to you on Saturday, guys. Thank you very much. Bye bye.